My name's Alana Sinclair, and I'm the manager of Cambridge Carbon Footprint, which is the charity organising the Open Eco Homes autumn season of events, which this tour is a part of. A few brief housekeeping Zoom things. Obviously, you've all been put on mute as you joined. We'd ask you to stay on mute if you can throughout the meeting. Although David Blake, who was speaking earlier, will be monitoring the chat, so he might call on you to unmute yourself and ask your question. Speaking of which, questions, we're asking people to put them in the chat, so the little speech bubble down below. David will, as I said, collate those questions, and when we come to the Q&As, he will either group them together or ask you to ask your question. I should also note that we are recording this evening's session. And we will be making that available publicly online, so we'll be popping it up on YouTube. If you would prefer that you are not in that video, do just let us know in the chat and we'll make sure that you're not visible in any video which goes out. Following the talk tomorrow, we will be sending an email to everyone who has booked. So we'll be sending out the link to the video of tonight's session, the slides from tonight's tour, and also a link to just a short 5-question survey. So that's it in terms of introductions. I'll hand over to Mark. Well, just very briefly, I guess a bit of an agenda. Mark's tour will be broken into 3 main sections. I think it's planning, construction, and plans realised. And in between or after each section, there will be a Q&A. So we will try and keep the questions relevant to the sections at hand. So I mean, pop your questions in the chat at any time, but David, I guess, will sort of curate them so that the relevant questions come after each section. Yeah, I think that's about it from me for now. So I'll hand over to you, Mark.
Are we in business? Do people see all that?
Yep.
Okay.
Great.
Well, good evening, everybody. It's as Alana says, I've sort of split the talk into 3 just to stop me going on too much. And I'm going to be looking really at the slide showing 3 sections. The first one being the background to the build, how we came to have the plot and the architectural ideas that went into the house. And then looking at the build process and some of the eco features we've incorporated, and finally look at some of the whys and hows behind we did it and some of the finished details. Down here on this introductory slide, our house that we built is at the bottom of the slide. It's in Sedgwick Street in Cambridge, and we moved into it in 2018, 2 years ago. Sedgwick Street's a one-way street off Mill Road, not far from Cambridge Station. It's very urban. For the romantics amongst you, you will be delighted to learn that our self-build story is framed within a love story. 2 60-somethings had met and hit it off big time in 2014, and we were basking in the delights of a newfound romance. Within weeks of meeting, we were talking about making a home together. Now, I had spent a lifetime working in and around home building, had both been a self-builder before, and I make a living writing about the process. Mandy, my wife, was a family therapist about to retire. We both had families, sharing 5 children and 3 grandchildren between us, and we wanted somewhere they could all come and stay and Christmas, that sort of thing. Then in September that year in 2014, Rightmove carried a listing for a warehouse on Sedgwick Street. Offers above 250,000, it said. No planning permission, but potential for a new house. Shall we go and have a look? I asked. Mandy said, why not? So we did what many Cambridge residents would do. We got on our bikes and went and investigated. And here is what we found. Now, turning that into a home would be some challenge. And right then, I felt like a challenge. I had cash available from the recent house sale. So we had the wherewithal to execute a quick purchase because we knew it would be a cash purchase. Mandy was game and we agreed to pursue it there and then. In fact, we actually shook hands on the deal on the pavement outside the warehouse on our first visit. This was arguably a very reckless act, buying a dilapidated warehouse with no side access on a narrow, sometimes busy one-way street, with no planning permission, without knowing who the neighbours were. It had all the potentials of a disaster in the making, but the gods must have favoured our sense of adventure because it all worked out fine, even though it took us 4 years to turn this odd neglected space into a home. Here's an aerial view of the plot. You can see from this that there's enough room for a garden. That's Sedgwick Street going down there, leading down towards Mill Road at the bottom, and the cross street St Philip's Road it's the first junction back from Mill Road. What was in the garden at the time when we purchased nothing more than an overgrown rubbish tip. The only condition placed on the sale by the vendor was that we should build an eco house. The vendor assessed the bids and we won through on the basis of my long-term interest in energy efficient housing. Just what an eco house meant in practice was left open, and just what we would build was something that had yet to take shape in our minds. One of the complexities I hadn't bargained for was that this area of Romsey Town had recently become a conservation area. And whilst the conservation department weren't wanting us to save the building, that there really wasn't much to save, they did want to see what we planned to put in its place before demolition would be consented. I had hoped to do it the other way around, demolish, clear the site, then survey and plan a course of action. Now, I may know a bit about the building process, but I'm no designer, and this was never going to be a straightforward house. So it was obvious that we required some professional help here. We needed an architect on board, much earlier in the process than I'd hoped for originally. We did a few inquiries and we quickly settled on Mole, the practice run by Meredith Bowles, who I'd known for some time and whose work I really like. They'd recently moved their office into Cambridge, and this added to the attraction. We wanted to create a new eco home, but one with a bit of a wow factor, at the same time something that would fit into the street and look like it lived there. That was pretty much the brief. Now, the architect started by looking at the surprisingly wide variety of styles in the neighbourhood. You think of Romsey as being all terraced houses, but in fact there's a lot of different houses around there. We particularly liked Argyle House, the top left-hand corner, number 1, which happens to be located right around the corner in St Philip's Road. It was the first house to be built in this part of town, and ours would probably be the last, so somehow we felt a connection with it. We also noticed that, like the warehouse we were replacing, it was a gable on to the street. We played with all manner of ideas about earlier what we might like to do with this thing, and we quite liked the top one, which we nicknamed the ziggurat. Well, let's render it, they said, and see what it looks like. Let's get a better idea. And that's what it turned out on render. Stunning looking place, but somehow it didn't really fit with Romsey, and we ended up rejecting it. A bit too Yemeni for Romsey, really. We ploughed on through more iterations. Eventually we hit on a form that everyone seemed comfortable with. It's not an easy, simple shape, but this is because we had to keep 2 things in mind. Firstly, we couldn't overpower the 7 homes on the, oh, sorry, I've gone one too fast. The 7 on this side, on the south side, on St Philip's Road, that adjoined our plot, and this accounts for the flattened main roof on the gable end, on the top of the ridge. Secondly, we couldn't block light from our neighbours on this side, so we had this accounts for the lower back and the strange section in the middle where we're getting light into the building. Now, this model was used to show to the neighbours at an open warehouse event, and we also used it in the planning meeting where our project won permission with full support of the planning committee. It wasn't actually a controversial application, but it was a lengthy, complicated process. It took about the best part of 18 months to get there. And we ended up with 18 planning conditions, many of which had to be satisfied before we could start building. I'm now going to attempt to go into a bit of video, so hopefully the gods are with us. We'll get through about a minute of a video and we'll have a walkthrough of the house. Not that one, we won't. Let's try again. Here we go. This is the walk down Sedgwick Street, away from Mill Road, and you see our house on the left and how it sort of fits size-wise, gable on with the terraced housing around it. Draw your attention to the zinc roof facing on the south side with the inset solar panels and the 2 veluxes lighting the first floor bathroom. And as you approach it, your eyes drawn to this louvered cedar which we used, and there's the bin store, the front bin store with a unique dry garden on it, the plaque we won from the Cambridge planners at the back, and our bike locks. There's no rear access, everything's out the front. There's no way of getting around the back. As you walk back across the street, you see the full-on gable and the neat sight lines in the louvered cedar. As we step into the house, you see we enter a long corridor. It's a long 20-metre long warehouse, and we basically kept the same footprint. We wandered down the passageway towards the back. In the middle is the downstairs bathroom, lots of wall-to-wall blue limestone, and that which is used on the floor throughout the ground floor. And as we move into the kitchen dining area, we get the big open plan effect of the kitchen dining room, lit overhead by the opening roof light, which is sort of brings a whole sort of different dimension to the space underneath. It's the only real light in the middle of the house. Swing round, you see back to the door, there's Mandy's bicycle locked to the front of the house, and there's a natural movement from the kitchen to the lower vaulted roof at the back, which we covered with a Douglas fir matched boarded sort of a finish. And as you walk out through the triple glazed sliding doors into the patio area in the garden, we're now halfway back on the plot. We fenced it all with a very simple roof batten from Ridgeons on both sides. We've now planted, this was done in June, this video, so we're getting the full benefit of the summer sun and on the 2 years growth in the garden. We incorporated a 1950s feature, a stainless steel washing line, which we think is one of our green eco features. We certainly use it a lot, both for clothes and for feeding all the tits that come down to the bird feeder. We've also included, if you look down on the left, hedgehog poles both sides, and we have a family of hedgehogs living in our house and sharing with the neighbours. So that's pretty good for a new house. Finally, as you come across to the studio at the back where I'm speaking from now, where I work, and the swing round, you look at the back of the house, and you get the two rear gables featuring the louvered cedar. That's the end of my first part of the talk. Any questions on that so far?
Well, I haven't found any questions. I haven't found any questions so far. If anybody does have anything they wish to raise this particular, there was Guy down here at the moment.
Well, I'm happy to carry on.
Here about the width of the plot.
Yes.
You managed to get planning permission.
Well, the width of the whole plot is 6 meters wide, almost exactly within 10 mil, and it goes right the way to the whole thing is 40 meters deep. It's exactly the same size as all the other houses when they were laid out in the 1890s. The question is, why was it never built on in the first place? And I suspect the history of it is that when the builders were building Sedgwick Street and Cavendish Road and the roads around here, they actually used to keep the odd plot back for maybe making lime and storing their materials, and it just never really got built. And there was a similar plot on the next street where an unbuilt plot. So it was actually set out when exactly the same size as all the other plots. So we really bought, a plot, and the warehouse appeared in the 1940s and was built very interesting, just some loose concrete and poured concrete. They didn't have blocks. It was poured with shuttering on it, and then the roof was a steel cage with asbestos sheething on it in very poor condition. And it had some commercial use over its first 20-30 years, but had just been abandoned for the last 30 years. It was filling up with rubbish. So the planners were very keen to see something good there, and the neighbours generally were very enthusiastic about replacing something that was basically overgrowing into their gardens. So actually there was very little opposition to replacing it with anything. So the planning permission was a softly affair with lots of gentle negotiation with the neighbours, but more or less everyone was on board. It wasn't actually as much of a struggle to help. The people on the left in the house, on the left of the picture here, on the north side, were incredibly helpful. We were so lucky there because they came in, they said, yes, whatever you do here is going to be an improvement. You can use our water, you can use our electricity, you can use our garden. And we really landed on our feet there. They're now very firm friends, but it could have been a very different story if we met hostility from the neighbours, but we didn't.
Kim Bolshaw, I don't know if she wanted to ask a question, as she's enabled here to give to talk. She's asking about the width of the plot. Kim, did you wish to ask a question?
Yeah, I've got a similar plot in Felixstowe. In fact, mine is probably 50% wider. I am just amazed. That doesn't look like 6 meters to me. It looks much wider. That's why I was asking. You've got an awful lot into the plot. And the follow-on question probably is, why not a pitched roof across the full width? Why did you go in for the flat bit on the side? Sorry for the lack of
in the middle.
Not the bit in the middle. I can understand the bit in the middle. It is just certainly at the front of the house where it's 2-story.
Yeah.
Why didn't you go for pitched across the full width?
Really, because it was actually interesting enough. We'll go back to this one here. The people in these houses wanted to see this chimney. The old warehouse had a ridge height somewhere between these two. It was higher than that, but lower than this roof. And we felt if we'd gone to the full gable or full width, which obviously would increase the height, we'd have blocked the streetscape. So it was really a way of keeping it, lessening the impact for the people in these houses over here, and that was felt to be so. That's why we've ended up with a sort of semi-pitched roof with a flat section. In fact, this side down here is almost all corridor and staircase. So the sort of the functioning transition parts of the building that side, and the rooms are all in that side. So that's how we've ended up with that sort of shape. It is complicated, but there's a window here, and the light's coming from this side, so that's why it's stepped back there.
Thanks.
And Sebastian, Sebastian Tripp wanted to ask about the dinosaurs in the front planter.
Oh yes.
We're on the same street, and we've cycled past your dinosaurs many a time. So yeah, I was going to ask about the dinosaurs, but also a broader question whether you had a landscape architect on board besides Maul, or whether the landscaping was all your own.
The landscape, the dinosaur park, Jurassic Park at the front is very much my baby. We didn't have a landscape architect for the top of the bin store. The back of the garden, we had not really landscape architect. We had Mandy's niece is a lighting designer, and she also does gardens. She came up with a plan, and we actually more or less built to that plan. But the plants we put in. There's a little bit. I'll be talking about the garden at the end, actually, because the garden's developed a life of its own. So there's a few slides on the garden. So I'll hold fire there.
Okay, we've got a question from Anne Bailey, but about energy consumption. But I think probably we'll leave that for a bit.
That's coming in the next section. Yeah.
Okay. Time's getting on. Hugh to everyone. Question: read the road. It's one way. I'm trying to find Hugh. Hugh is on the list to give you access to talk. Here we are. Unmute. No, I can't unmute you, Hugh.
Hi.
Oh, hi, you're there. Good, right.
Hi. I was just curious, when we saw the picture of the road, when we were in the video looking or moving towards the house,
yeah,
the traffic was coming towards us,
yeah,
but the arrow in the cycleway was going against the traffic. I just wondered if that's a common thing in your area.
In Romsey, it's very common, yes. So actually, it's introduced in the last few years. The traffic can flow, but bikes can go both ways.
Oh, okay.
It's just one way. It's a constriction. We also have pavement parking, with the. It's fun. Fortunately, it's not too busy, but it can get very squally at times.
Okay, just curious on that one.
I think we ought to perhaps go on a bit and you carry on. I've got a few more questions to ask when you get to the.
Okay, well, let's launch into the next section, because the question is, how did we get there? From July 2016, which is the date we got planning permission, to July 2018, 2 years later, which we've just about finished it completely. It was a lot of hard work, a lot of help, and a lot of money. I will talk you through some of the highlights. The first thing we had to do was to demolish the warehouse. Mark, it took no more than a week. This slide shows progress after 2 days, and that's just Mandy's work at the pair of sandals. No, it's not. It's Jackson's who are doing the demolition. They were actually brilliant. They did a wonderful job. After a week, we had something approaching what I'd wanted 18 months earlier, a clear site. But this time we had a plan, and we had planning permission, albeit with many conditions. One was that we had to investigate the contaminated land because we're developing a brownfield site. This introduced a new delay of about 4 months, during which we drilled holes, sent samples off for analysis, then waited and waited, only to discover there was rather more heavy metals present than we'd expected. So we had to excavate deeper, and then we introduced some certified clean soil, which was that lovely red stuff you see in Bedfordshire, complete with Brussels sprout seeds, which proceeded to pop up during the course of the build. It was November that year before we could start building. Because of the restricted access, we had to start at the back and work forward. So the garden studio, which was done by MySpace in Norfolk Street, it was the first thing we built, followed by the fencing, and then we had to find home in the garden for 12,000 bricks and 14 tons of sand. This is quite a considerable process in itself. During this time, Mole, and this is Meredith Bowles, the main man, they were working on the detailed technical drawings for the finish of the house, helping us as we worked through the pre-commencement planning details. This was the brick panel we showed to the planners just before inspection. All the while we were liaising with Potton, who we'd chosen to build the SIPS panel superstructure. In April 2017, we finally got underway on the main house. Here are some of the action shots of the groundworks. I was there every day, cycling over from Chesterton, pausing to get married to Mandy at the Cambridge Union on my 64th birthday. Our honeymoon was 4 nights in Italy, and then we were back on site. This is what the site looked like in July 2017, thanks to Google Earth satellite imagery. You can see the studio at the back, if my cursor is working, yeah. The materials stored on site, and whilst at the front you can see we've done the groundwork, we haven't yet put the drains in. That's more or less the original footprint of the warehouse at its 6-metre width. Now the house is designed to use very little energy, but it's not quite a passive house, which is widely regarded as the gold standard for low energy housing. Well, why not? Passive house is essentially a recipe for designing low energy homes. To have a passive house, you've got to have lots of insulation, triple glazing, it must be airtight, it must have few, if any, thermal bridges. And it also requires mechanical ventilation. It's very much an engineering solution to the issue of what an eco house might or might not be. There are lots of numbers, huge spreadsheets to work to get to all the levels required. The thing is, it works, but it's much easier on some houses than others, and ours presented a couple of problems. We had restricted width, as I already mentioned, just 6 metres. So the extra insulation was at the expense of internal room sizes, which was an issue because we only had room at the back of the house, but the only room at the back of the house, which is, only the room at the back of the house is spoiled for space. Everywhere else we were constricted by the passageway and the staircases. And because of the close proximity to our neighbours, remember the planning model, we had a very complicated form, no less than 19 external surfaces against an optimal 7. So the form factor's not very good. The whole structure is not very optimal in terms of trying to do a passive house. Nevertheless, we did use the passive house principles to guide our design, and we set a challenging energy target known as the low energy building standard, which is what they use basically for doing renovations rather than new builds. Here is the design, for instance, we came up with on the ground floor. The floor is a beam and block floor, which is insisted on by the structural engineers, but it has masses of foam insulation above it. So here's the beam blocks, the beams in there, the foam insulation. In fact, we ended up putting rather more in than was shown on the drawing. The walls are made of SIPS panels. This is this greyed out section here. SIPS stands for structural insulated panels, a form of timber frame construction which gets its strength from sandwiching slabs of insulation between outer layers of OSB. It's both energy efficient because it's something like 90% insulation and relatively thin, making it ideal for a site with restricted width. Now, these SIPS panels incorporate 120 mil of foam insulation between the OSB, easy enough to satisfy current building regs. But around that, we wrapped 70 millimeters of Cooltherm, Kingspan Cooltherm insulation to give more insulation, to get a value of about 1.1. The thermal bridge detail between the floor and the wall is handled by Celcom blockwork here under the wall plate. On the outside of that, we have 70 mil of extruded polystyrene. So the cold bridge, which is the known factor for leaking heat down here, is effectively minimized, if not eliminated. Here's some action shots of how we managed to get the SIPS panels into the site. We had this wonderful shot here, this truck that used to come up from Whitstable of all places. We'd go to Potton to St Neots in the morning, pick up the panels, drive over ourselves and spend 2 or 3 hours unloading them. We were lucky that although Sedgwick Street is one way, there is actually a bypass route around through Wetton Hall Road, and we were able to close it off for 2 hours and traffic was still able to get through. I was just pure luck that we ended up there. If we'd been on the next block, we'd have been stuck, but there was actually a route around the constriction of having a lorry there for 2 hours. This amazing piece of kit, the fly jib crane, is capable of lifting up the panels 7 meters in the air over this telephone wire and 25 meters back from the lorry. Really, we would have been stuck without it. It would have been months doing if we'd had to handball it across. Here are the SIPS panels taking shape. The top left is the lower vaulted roof. Top right is the upstairs looking towards the street. And at the bottom, you can see the finished house taking shape. By October, after about 3 months, Potton's work was complete and we were free to get on with the finishes. By Christmas, 3 months later, we were inside, the glazing was already in, and we had the underfloor heating fixed, and we were pouring the floor screed. You can actually see this is a pump floor screed, just because this is the floor screed coming in. It's just about to be released into the back of the house. It's an amazing process. It took about 2.5 hours to screed the whole down ground floor. I'd not worked with it before and was really impressed by it. Triple glazing, everything in the house is triple glazed. It's hard to have a side of triple glazing. Here's one of what triple glazing looks like. Obviously, it's got 3 panes of glass. So possibly of more interest is all the taping that goes on around it. You can see this one in our bedroom. The blue tape was put in by the window installers, connecting the actual joinery to the plywood boxing we put around it. The green tape is our air tightness tape, which is seal up every single gap we've got around the house to get the air tightness down. Talking of air tightness, it's worth discussing that we had a blower door test, which is one of the keys for a passive house construction. It's one of the few qualities of a building that you can actually measure on site. We did a blower door test twice, once at this stage and once on completion. To do this, you put the interior under a low pressure, 50 pascals of pressure, and then you measure the flow rate required to hold that pressure. From this, you derive the air tightness score. Passive house looks for a score of 0.6 air changes per meter square per hour. Our final score was 1.0. That may sound like abject failure, but bear in mind the average new build house scores somewhere between 5 and 10, and the proposed building regulations target for 2025 is only 8. So we're 8 times better than this. I think it says more about the failure of our building regs than it does about the standards we achieved here. Which brings us on to the actual energy performance of the house, and this is our EPC, our Energy Performance Certificate, issued on completion. It gives a prediction of the overall energy use in the home, and against this we can measure your success or otherwise. We achieved a very good score. It would have been disappointing if we hadn't, and our post-occupancy monitoring suggests that we're within a whisker of achieving the proposed outcomes. But one of the features I want you to know is that we use the gas boiler to heat the underfloor heating and the hot water. That, in retrospect, was our biggest mistake. We should have installed a heat pump. Now, our design brief had emphasised the so-called fabric first approach. This eschews green bling like heat pumps and solar panels in favour of spending money on insulation, glazing and airtightness. Having done all this, you simply don't need to spend good money on heat pumps because you reduce the demand for energy so much that any energy you do consume is infinitesimally small. Whilst that may not be quite true, it does pretty well summarise my thinking back in 2015-16 when we were formulating the plans. There was also the fact that back then electricity was still a pretty dirty form of fuel, far worse in terms of carbon emissions than mains gas. So in our quest to reduce carbon emissions, which we were very keen to do, there was logic in fitting a gas boiler. But 4 years on, due in large part to the dramatic growth of North Sea wind farms, the carbon intensity of electricity is now usually less than gas. And that makes a compelling case for using electricity to heat your home and its hot water. And were we to build the home today, we would definitely go for a heat pump because grid electricity is now the greenest fuel out there. But we are saddled with a gas boiler, albeit a state-of-the-art condenser. It will be much harder to replace it with electric heating as and when the time comes. Other regrets? Well, I'd have loved to have achieved full passive house standard, but it wasn't to be. We would have built a structure that saved around 1,250 kilowatt hours of energy a year on what we actually get. But that's the equivalent of the output of about 5 solar PV roof panels. Bearing this in mind, I softened my aversion to green bling and installed solar PV to make up the difference, but we only have 7 panels. We would have liked more, but the lower roof is shaded by trees, so we had to make do with 7. Note, looking at our EPC, we got a score of 93 out of a potential 94. Why have we got 94? Well, it's because we didn't fit solar thermal panels. That would have got us 94. We had no room for any additional solar panels. That wasn't really an option. Instead, we fitted one of these, an iBoost diverter. Now, what the hell is this? It senses the electricity coming down from the PV panels, and when it's being exported to the grid, rather than losing it to the grid, it switches it to an immersion heater in the hot water cylinder, so that the surplus power is used to heat our hot water in the daytime. It mimics what a solar thermal panel does, only using electricity rather than piped water. Is it successful? In a good month, it certainly is. It diverts something like 100 kilowatt hours into the tank, enough for about half our hot water use. If we had the full 16 PV panels, the diverter would deliver the same heat energy as solar thermal panels for much less price. Another aspect of low energy passive house style building is to install a mechanical ventilation system with heat recovery. It's the only bit of the recipe that requires power, the motor to drive a fan, although you can actually see down the bottom here the power consumption at the 3 different fan speeds. It's absolutely minimal. You know, it's 24 watts to run the whole system on the standard setting of 2. We plumped for the Paul Novus system sold by the Green Building Store, and their service starts with the design. This is the design. The heart of the system is the red box at the bottom of the diagram, which is the heat recovery unit itself. External air is drawn into this, filtered and then warmed by the exhaust air as they are routed past one another inside the heat exchanger. It emerges, capturing 90% of the heat from the exhaust air, and is then pumped to various outlets around the house through the light blue ducting here. The exhaust air is drawn into the green ducting and back down into the red box before being expelled outside, having given up most of its heat. That, in a nutshell, is how it works. It's on 24/7, and you can switch it between the 3 settings, 1, 2, and 3, via a display mounted in the kitchen. By and large, we're pretty happy with it, although it struggles to keep us cool in summer. Here you see the 2 external vents in the side passage, and here you see some of the complexity involved in routing these aluminium pipes around the building. The one on the left takes it up from the ground floor to the first floor, and the one on the right is in the plant room, where you see the boiler and the PV diverter and the fuse box. Quite a complicated job routing all that stuff through there. It's worth also noting that it formed part of Potton's design. There's 2 steels going through the house at that level, and we had to pre-drill holes to get the pipe through. It's not something you can do as an afterthought. Very much central to the the creation of the house. I'm going to finish with hopefully another video sequence of me working the filter on this is the heat recovery unit of Paul Novus. In there are two filters, one on the inlet and one on the outlet. This is the inlet filter. After about 4 months, after about the first 4 months of the pandemic, it went in as a brand new white filter, and that's what it took out of the atmosphere. So there's a lot of pollen in there. Who knows? There may even be some old COVID in there, but it certainly keeps the house fresh and filtered. And you change that every 6 months or so. Looking around the rest of the utility room, there's the fuse box, the boiler down below it, the manifolds for the underfloor heating, and finally the oversized mains pressure cylinder, which stores 230 litres of water, and we use that really as a heat battery, so we can get a lot of solar heat into it and store it. It's probably 2 or 3 days worth of hot water use. That concludes the section on the energy use and the theory behind why we built the house that way. So, any more questions at this point?
Well, we have several from Wendy B, who's unmuted or should be unmuted, and she's asking some questions on contractors and also about finish on the flat roofs, which probably fits in with what you've been talking about. So, are you okay to talk, Wendy?
Yeah, absolutely. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep. Wonderful. Yeah, there was a couple of questions. I'm really interested in what material you use on your flat roofs. I inherently don't like flat roofs, but I just wondered from a wear and tear what you used.
It's Trocal, which is one of these single ply membranes. I've forgotten very similar to Sarnafil. In fact, owned by the same company as Sarnafil, which is probably the market leader one of them in this area.
So it's not like a rubber?
No, it's not the rubber ones. They're a plasticized membrane. We've got a rubber on the where I'm speaking from the studio down the end. It's neither a felt nor a rubber. It's really a molded plastic. It's stuck down and welded together, heat sealed at the joints, and it's very, very good for doing fiddly little details around edges and things. A lifespan, I think, of around about 30 years, and it is repairable. So I'd never worked with it before. I hadn't built for 25, 30 years before doing this house. I used to be an active builder back in the day, in the 80s and 90s. We were quite happy to be using 3-ply felt. That was it. Since then, the choices in the market have grown more complicated. So Troco was done. The white roofing were our contractors, and they steered us down that route. We were happy to use it. So far, it's been fine.
So the another question was, you use Potton as the main structure.
Yeah.
How did you manage to get other trades to quote for the aspects that they didn't do? Because I failed in my try to get builders to quote outside the Potton envelope.
Some of them we got on quotes. The services were done on quotation. The roofing was done on quotation. The joinery was done on quotation. A lot of the carpentry and the finished details, I just managed it. We were paying. I'll talk a little bit about in the final session. We were paying guys on day rate, which of course is meant to be a very risky thing to do. But they were so complicated, the jobs. We'd spend longer quoting for them. We'd actually do them. So. It was, so we were doing, I was buying the materials, acting as the main contractor, really.
So did you have contracts in place, or?
Not with the subbies we were doing on day rates, no.
And how did you manage to actually engage with the planners? Because my extension was refused by the local planning during this COVID, but I didn't get any opportunities after the refusal to engage. My only option was to go to the planning inspectorate which I've done so, and I'm 6 months down the line and still waiting. So how did you manage to engage?
Well, we're working with Mole, we engaged with them very gently, and we went for the pre-app route, which is basically where you go to talk to them with some ideas before you put the final application in, and talk about, try and gouge out of them what their interests are, what their fears are and everything, and hopefully smooth over the process of the actual application. But in theory, it's a great system. In practice, it's incredibly slow. Our pre-app, I think it took 5 or 6 months to get an answer. It was by far the slowest part of the planning application. You know, people were on maternity leave and this sort of thing, and just, you know, and in fact they were fine with it. And the actual application went through. It passed in, I think, about 12 weeks, which isn't bad these days. I mean, planning is a suffering, isn't it? Hugely. And anyone who's involved with the trade knows that we have too few planners and far too many applications, and it's actually quite hard to talk to them now because they're so busy and snowed under. It used to be much more informal. You get good feedback, and it's getting much more difficult. And there are probably architects on this session here who could tell you more about it than I could. But we didn't actually have a huge amount of problem with the plan. It just took a very long time to do it, and we went tread very slowly. Having failed, you can always put a new application in. They can't fail a planning application without having a reason for failure, and that gives you a good clue as to what their thinking is. So you can put another application in that addresses those. Or
they want it smaller, but smaller doesn't work when I'm trying to accommodate my parents.
Well, then you more or less you're in the hands of the planning inspector now, aren't you?
Okay,
I'm just going to interrupt. Sorry, I'm just watching the clock here, and we're getting on for time. So
okay.
I think
we
time
have
for
one
Q&A at the end, but I think perhaps we should, for now, if we can, just get on to the next section, and then there may be time. You know, I don't know how you are for time, Mark, but perhaps
I can go past 7, but
okay.
yeah. But maybe we should head on to the next section, because how I dealt with it is dealt with there. So
brilliant. Yep. All right.
Okay.
Fantastic.
Yeah, we'll look at some prettier stuff now, and some of the unusual finishes we achieved and how we got there. First, the louvered cedar effect, which is the most striking feature at the front of the house, and also wrapped around the rear as well. I'd never seen it before, but Mole had practiced hands at it. And I said to Meredith that one of my pet hates was panels of cedar cladding affixed to walls at great height in order to say something sustainable. Quite what, I'm not sure. But they discolour within months and frequently look very awful very quickly. Why not produce a feature that doesn't discolour and improves with age? This was the result. The key to getting it right was aligning these sawtooth fillets, no mean feat in itself. The timber was machined by millworks in Bottisham and treated with organo wood, which, as well as providing some fire and rot protection, also does the pre-aging. It takes the raw red out of the cedar and makes it look aged, like it's been there for 10 years. This is Duncan Dodd's Artisan Structures, our master carpenter, finishing the rear gable. You can see what a fiddle it was to get that in with all the different angles at work. And we're very pleased with how it turned out. And the shadow gap on the front elevation, which you got a good elevation of here, it was also his work. Very skilled craftsmen. They took the architect's designs and they ran with them. I haven't really mentioned my role in building the house, and it seemed like a good point to explain it. I acted as the main contractor, hiring in trades as and when required. The superstructure, the 6 panels, were built and erected by Potton Homes with very little input from me. But they handed over the site, and from then on I was responsible for organising it to completion. Now that's a pretty common self-build route to take, especially when you're using a factory-built superstructure. Self-build takes many forms, from people undertaking the vast work themselves, the vast bulk of work themselves, to getting a custom home builder to undertake the entire project on your behalf. The crucial factor is that the self-builder is the one paying the bills throughout, and that differentiates them from the speculative builders who build to sell on. Now, from my previous experience, I've got 1 or 2 contacts in the building trade, having been active in the 80s and 90s. But almost everyone working on the site was new to me, and as so often happens, they introduced me to mates who then introduced me to other mates. Now, maybe I was lucky, but the standards were pretty high, with very few exceptions, and the costs were pretty fair, I thought. Much of the later works were paid for on a day rate basis, the going rate being about £200 a day for skilled tradesmen. Everybody working for me delivered a fair day's work, and some, like Duncan, were verging on the inspired. It also helped to have a fantastic set of drawings from the architectural practice. This saved a huge amount of time when it came to organising the finishes. The overall budget was just over 500,000, including professional fees, demolition works, the studio, and all the garden and external works. And that was about 20% over our original budget when we first shook hands on the deal outside the warehouse. But it was almost entirely down to things that we chose to spend money on ourselves during the job, which is a good point to introduce the overhead roof light, because we ahed and ummed about this feature for months before plumping on the sliding roof designed by Cantifix, which cost no less than £27,000. Ouch. That wasn't in the original budget, and we could have done it far cheaper, probably under £10,000. But we had to have overhead light in here because there was no possibility of having conventional windows because we were overlooking people's gardens. And we looked at Velux opening skylights and thought, no. We looked at several other suppliers, but we couldn't quite make head nor tail of what it was they were trying to do. So we plumped for an option that was triple glazed. It had to be because of our specification. But it has low G glass, which reflects heat away from the room below. Overhead glazing often causes rooms beneath to bake in summer heat waves. We had to find ways of having an opening roof. We now find that actually having the roof light closed during days of peak sunshine keeps it cooler than having it open, because the low G glass reflects the heat away. At night time, we open it and get a cool breeze through. And here's the view of the roof light from our bedroom window. You can see that it's in two halves. The right-hand side slides over the left-hand side. Just occasionally, we forget to close it at night, but fear not. There's a rain sensor which bursts into action when there's a drop of rain, and it closes for us automatically. Thus far, it's worked. Doubtless one day we'll end up with a wet kitchen. We also have sun pipes. Now that was an interesting one. We've got two providing daylight to the landing at the top of the stairs and to an upstairs cloakroom. Now this was a feature I had misgivings about. I've never worked with them before. They look fiddly to put in. They look like they would lose heat in an otherwise very energy efficient structure. They might even be drafty. And of course, at night they're utterly useless. But I went along with the architect's design and ended up being delighted with the result. This is the windowless upstairs cloakroom lit by the angled sun pipe. I love this photo because it's all about the daylight streaming in from above. You realise that daylight is of itself very important to the quality of the space. Now, the daylight sometimes clashes with energy efficiency, so be it. Sometimes daylight has to win. Actually, I don't think the energy performance of these sun pipes is too bad, although it's hard to get good data on this point. This is the ensuite bathroom upstairs, lit by the two Veluxes that you see on the approach of the house. Apart from being another light room that comes alive with overhead daylight, there's another detail I wanted to highlight here, which is the use of the digital shower and bath controls. I've lived with digital showers before and I love them. Here we added a bath filler as well. Note that the bath has no taps. Instead, you press a button on a panel at the foot of the bath, and the bath starts filling from an outlet behind the overflow. Both the temperature and the depth are preset, and it turns itself off when it's full. Not only is it very convenient, but I think it probably saves a little energy as well. Though not as much as not having baths in the first place and making do with a very quick shower. I said some of the features were arrived accidentally, and here's one such, our half-moon door handles. Now, these are normally used on sliding cupboard doors, and that's exactly how we started using them, as the cupboards were ready to fit before we take delivery of the internal main doors. But we really like the look and feel of them, so we fitted them to our hallway cupboards as well, seen here on the right, and then decided to use them on the internal doors as well. At £5.80 a pair from Ironmongery Direct, they were a bargain and also very simple to fit. Just drill a hole, a 70mm hole down here with a hole saw, and they slip in. A ball catch does the work of a latch. Another detail we stumbled on was using Douglas fir strips to line the vaulted ceiling in the living room. The architectural drawings didn't show any details for the ceiling, so we just improvised. Millworks, the same company we worked with in Bottisham, who did the cedar at the front of the house, just happened to have some really nice Douglas fir available, and we thought it would look good. We didn't realise quite how striking it would be. It's a real wow factor in its own right. And all the various photographers who've come around all beam in on this roof. The timber was all cut to 5 metre lengths. That meant we didn't have any joints at all. Mandy and I limed the wood, take out the colour variations, because Douglas fir is very variable in colour. We calculated the shadow gap needed, and then we let the carpenters let rip in homage to all those 1980s matchboard ceilings we once used in loft conversions and bathrooms. If you look carefully here, you can just make out the fine detailing of the screws where we've got we've got 5 rows of screws all perfectly matched to hold it up.
I'm going to interrupt you, Mark, just to let you know we've probably got about 5 more minutes for this section.
Okay, I'm really just onto the garden now. Finally, like to look at mention the garden. We were lucky to have garden space. It was one of the things that attracted us to this site, and that's how it looks. I'll skip through the garden centre because it's just a few slides of what it looks like from the back of the house, and that's the famous dinosaur garden at the front of the house, which is all dry garden stuff. A quick mention of my book, my baby, The House Builder's Bible, which I've been writing since the 1990s. It's now in its 30th edition. This edition carries far more information about this house than I've been able to fit into this brief talk. If you wanted, it's available from good bookshops, it's available from Amazon, and it's available from our own website, Or Below Books, where I run a micro publisher to do with self-build. And we have a few slides that were put on to discuss the train. Do you want to do it, Alana, or do you want to do it at the end? Have you got me, Alana? You're mute.
Sorry, I had myself on mute. I was just going to say, maybe we'll do these slides at the end.
Okay.
Maybe stop sharing the screen for now, and we'll do a bit. There's some great questions.
Okay, let's do that.
How long have we got, Alana, for questions? 5 minutes?
Yeah, I mean, if we go for 5 minutes now, then I'll do a kind of formal wrap up. But if there are more questions, it sounds as though Mark might be happy to field a few more to 7.
Okay, we have a few questions on carbon analysis of the project by Ralph Carpenter and Annie N. I don't know if either of those want to sort of ask a question, but you're both asking the same thing on carbon analysis.
Hiya.
I start.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
The reason I ask this question is that we've recently set up an architects or an RIBA group because you may know that there's an agenda to drive down carbon emissions and zero carbon. The RIBA is pushing for zero carbon by 2030, which also means carbon embodied in the materials. I noticed that you've used a lot of very high carbon materials like oil-based insulation, concrete, bricks, making the job quite difficult to deliver as well. And it just, the question really was, did you think about those issues at the time? I realize it was a couple of years ago and maybe before all this started, but it seems to me that there is a point of discussion here about your carbon footprint.
I can only agree with you. The answer is no, we didn't give it a moment's thought. Traditionally, I've always looked at embodied carbon and said it'll get repaid within a few years if you have a very low energy house. It now looks like that may not quite be true, and there may be some issues that it's actually rather longer than that. And it's very possible if we were to, things change, don't they? Very quickly. In 5 years, I think we'd probably use different materials to build it. But yeah, we were simply concentrating on bangs for buck and getting because we were restricted width. We wanted to get as much insulation as possible.
Yeah, fair point.
We didn't consider embodied carbon at all.
Okay, perhaps we can quickly move on to energy consumption. Anne Bailey and Byron Chan have both asked questions about energy use, how much carbon is used each year, and what the energy use is. So I don't know if either of those two would like to ask a question.
I haven't done the carbon calculation, but I can tell you exactly, we're using just about 3,000 kilowatt hours for heating. And bear in mind that this studio I'm talking about is separate to the main house, and we heat it with a little electric radiator, yet it's also 15 square meters. We're using 3,000 kilowatt hours of gas for space heating, about the same for domestic hot water, and we're using about 3,000 kilowatt hours of electricity to run all the appliances, the lighting and everything. So we're on about 9,000 kilowatt hours. Everything, every light in the house, we've got 80 LEDs. Well, that's a classic example here. You know, LEDs are incredibly efficient, but with 80 of, you know, if you put them all on, that's nearly a kilowatt of heat. You could virtually heat the house with the LEDs on. The space heating is a very good figure. If it was, we're 25% adrift of what the passive house would be. It would have been about 2,000 and a bit. On hot water, we've got the help from the iBoost, but basically hot water isn't addressed by any of these systems, other than having a heat pump, which we didn't put in. And the appliances, we've got energy efficient appliances, but so the overall score is good, but it's not nothing. The idea that you've got to run it on nothing, you know, we do have a heating system and it does come on at the moment, typically like today, the last few days when the house has held at 20 degrees without any heating. I bet you most houses haven't. It's very good at that, but come the middle of winter, we definitely need the heating.
Just a couple of short questions to finish up with. Fran Abrahams is asking about louvered cedar, and could you explain a little bit more about it? I have enabled her so she can ask you a question.
Sorry, yeah, we've been kind of wrestling with kind of different types of cladding. Should we buy, you know, cedar and or larch and you know, char it ourselves? And I was quite interested to know what your louvered thing was. Just how did you make that decision as well?
Very much led by Mole Architects. They said, you know, if you want a cedar that isn't going to decolour and look naff very quickly, make sure it's ventilated. So you've got this sort of louvered fixture. So I mean, it looks stunning. Bloody complicated to do. I think it cost a small fortune. I mean, dear old Duncan was up there for a couple of weeks just trying to get the battens level with each other, because it's a work of art to do it. You could do it with any timber. There's no reason you couldn't do it with larch or even you could. I suppose if you had scorched timber, you wouldn't really need to, would you? Because you've already taken the discoloration out of it. It's just an interesting architectural effect. I mean, it just looks very different, doesn't it? But it wasn't easy to do. It's quite labour intensive.
Just one final
thing to hear that it cost a fortune.
Just one final quick question to end on. Do you get birds, bats, and wildlife in the timber cladding?
No. Funny enough, no. we had a swift box built into the wall on the north side. Swifts have never been near it. We get a good clutch of sparrows using it though, which is nice because there aren't that many sparrows around here. But we've never had anything nesting in the louvered cedar. Okay, well I'll hand back to Alana. I do have a couple of questions if there is time, but basically I think we're probably near the end. So back to you, Alana.
Brilliant, thank you. Hopefully you can all see my slides again, can you?
Yep.
Yeah, okay, fantastic. So very quickly, I'm going to launch a poll actually, just to check in with people about this evening's session and whether it's been useful, whether it's helped people feel more likely to create their own eco-home. So I'll leave that up and running for about a minute while I just quickly tell you about some other activities that we have coming up. So we do have some thermal imaging training through the winter months where you can get trained up in how to use one of our thermal imaging cameras. They're really useful in terms of detecting where your house is leaking heat, essentially, if your insulation's working correctly, if your windows are maybe leaky, if you've got drafts. It'll help you spot those things in a really easy visual manner. So we've got 1 hour training sessions, which steps you through, how to actually use the camera physically, but also more importantly, how to interpret the images to understand what you're seeing and what you might want to do about that. And if you come along to one of these training sessions, they will be virtually, like this one has been, and you'll then be able to borrow one of CCF's thermal imaging cameras. So bookings for these will open in the next couple of weeks. So if you keep an eye on Open Eco Homes, there'll be details there. Also, just a quick plug for Solar Together. If you have any thoughts that you might want to or be interested in getting solar panels or even actually battery storage, there's a group buying scheme that Cambridge City Council and South Cambs are running through Solar Together, where you can get a discount essentially on solar panels. So they're taking expressions of interest now, and essentially there'll be this auction on October 6th where they will get back to you with a quote, and then you can choose whether or not you want to go ahead and purchase solar panels. So there's no obligation. So if you're at all interested, it might be worth putting in an expression of interest there. And also just to say, there's obviously more Open Eco Homes tours and talks available. So check out the website and book onto more tours. I'm going to end the polling now, and I'm going to share the results with you. Looks quite positive that lots of people have been, well, either already have an eco home or are likely or much more likely to create their own eco home. Before I quickly hand back to David for perhaps hopefully a few more questions. Mark is being very generous, offering to stick around. I'm just going to pop in the chat a couple of links. So firstly, we've got a link to a 5-question feedback survey. So just a little bit more detailed questions. I mean, it's only 5, but that feedback helps us to understand if the sessions are working, if they're useful, and what we can do to improve them. So it's really helpful if you can fill that out. And a link just to our donations page. So, if you have found this evening session useful, it would be wonderful if you consider making a donation to help us fund more events like these. We're a tiny organisation, just 2 staff members, but we run 50 or 60 different events across a year, all like this, helping to make make it easier for people to live in a low carbon way. So I think that is it from me. Just a quick reminder that, again, this session has been recorded, and we'll be emailing you out the slides and the link to the video tomorrow, hopefully. Back to you, David and Mark.
Okay. End up with just a few quick questions then, because I don't want to keep Mark going too long. One question from King Bolshaw was, did you consider render on the side walls to maximize internal width? And how useful was the architect's model when discussing with the planners and neighbours?
That's 2 different questions. The architect's model was very useful. It's so much better than using 3D rendering on computers, and it was very useful to have a feedback for the neighbours. We actually had an open day in the front of the warehouse, and were able to show them, and because it's a big thing to put in the middle of an existing streetscape, isn't it? And we were expecting a lot of trouble, and there were lots of issues that came up, but bit by bit, we sort of one by one we addressed them all, and so I think it was when it made a difference to the planners, I don't know, because the planning meeting, it's a nice thing to turn up with, but it's I don't know whether that affected the planning meeting at all, but it was certainly very helpful with the neighbours for visual. The question about was, do we consider doing away with brick? We were actually looking at using brick skins on the outside of the house. The planners were very keen for us to use Cambridge whites. Of course, we're on a back street in Cambridge, if we're going to render, probably wouldn't have gone down very well. Brick skins would have given us, we could have saved probably, 100 mil or so on the width, which makes, when you've got a restricted room width, that makes a big difference. And the trouble with partly is that actually the choice on brick skins is really quite limited. And you couldn't get anything to match a nice. I mean, it'd be lovely to use second-hand Cambridge stocks, but they were coming in at £2 a brick when we were trying to get them, whereas we ended up with a developer brick at about 70 pence. That's certainly, you know, that would have saved us, that would cost us 35, 40,000 more to use Cambridge, second-hand Cambridge whites.
Okay, there's one or two people already left, but Rehab Khalid has a question about the type of glazing for the kitchen skylight and the heat gain in summer.
Yep.
And there was a similar one allied to that, which was whether what the windows were made of. Did you use aluminium?
Oh yeah, the vertical windows are all timber windows with aluminium cladding. The sliding doors are all aluminium Rainers, which is a big manufacturer in Belgium, made by a company called Livingwood in fact, Livingwood in Bury St Edmunds. Can't recommend them too highly. They did all our joinery. They didn't do the overhead one in the kitchen, which was done by Candyfix, which is a firm in London specialising in structural glazing. They're busy doing the Battersea Power Station at the moment, so they're busy boys. And that is basically got very little framing in it. It's mostly glass with a steel frame with aluminium capping. So that's just how it worked.
Okay, and the final question is, how big is the house? What's the sort of square meterage of the floor area?
The internal floor area is 137 square meters. It's 2 bedrooms upstairs, not that big a space. Downstairs, it's probably 2/3 downstairs, 1/3 upstairs. That's the internal heated area, plus 15 square meters in the studio down the end where I actually spend a lot of time. So all in all, that's 152 square meters. Yeah.
Well, that sounds very good. I think I'll probably leave it there because we've come to the end of the sensible questions that we can ask you about what you're doing. Thanks very much.
Well, it's been great. Thanks for everyone attending, and it's been a pleasure to show everybody around the house in these funny times.
I was just one thing popped up here. What were the bricks used at the front path and slope, and where did you get them from?
What are the bricks?
Yeah.
From memory, they're Wienerberger Marshalls. They're common brick used around Cambridge. We bought them through one of the brick factors. I can't remember who it was now. It was someone up in the Fens. Not Brickability, but they're used quite regularly. I mean, they're lovely brick actually, considering they're actually, but they're imported from Holland.
If I could just say, it was the brick on the path and the slope that I was.
Oh, that one. Oh, those that Phil Latham did. They're from Mandarin Stone. They are a limestone paver, a French one. I can't remember the name of them. We'd all the limestone floor tiling, which is beautiful, Blue Molianos limestone. It's a stunning effect. You actually see the fossils in the limestone, which is a Portuguese limestone. And we used quite a lot of Mandarin stone for there, and we also used a wonderful tiling company in London for the feature tiles. The name of which completely escapes me, but Mandarin Stone supplied those bricks out the front and the blue ones, which are the edging ones. That's a great feature, that sloping roof, because
yes, I mean, I really noticed that, and I'm doing some paving outside my house, and it is going to be a slope as well, but the colour coordinates with the house bricks and the gravel really well. So that was what I was asking. So I've put down Mandarin Stone. You said it was from Phil someone.
Phil Latham did the front tiling. He's a very popular Romsey builder.
Oh, okay.
He only seems to work in Romsey. But he does a lot of tiling. He does some. In fact, we pitched the idea of someone in Romsey Road. He'd also use the same paver. So you get these ideas. You go around. And you say, well, that's nice. halfway down Romsey Road this month with a lovely garage, and Phil Latham said, and we said, we want that, you know, it's just, you know, lovely brick, lovely paver.
Right, well, we'll definitely leave it there, and I'll hand you back to Alana. Thank you.
Okay.
I think that's it then. If we've got the bottom of the questions, then it's probably time for us all to sign off. Let me just say thank you, Mark. I don't know if you've looked at the chat, but there have been
I'm looking at it, yeah.
many compliments and thanks from everyone about how wonderful the tour was, how helpful, how useful. So I think that's it. I think that's the main message. Thank you. It's been brilliant.
Right. Good night, everybody.
Good night. Cheers.
I have to eat some hake.
Sounds like a good way to end the evening, and well deserved. All right. Thanks
Thanks
everybody.
very much. Bye.
Bye.